Roger Waters paid a heavy price for humiliating Ozzy Osbourne at Abbey Road Studios. No one in Abbey Road Studios that night could have imagined that the air, heavy with nostalgia and pride, would soon shatter into something unforgettable. Before you dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to Voices of Darkness and like and share this video with your friends, because tonight we'll witness how arrogance met humility and lost. The golden lights of Abbey Road Studios glowed like a living memory. Every brick, every shadow, carried echoes of songs that changed the world. The event was private. Only the most legendary names in British rock had been invited. Inside, the air hummed with quiet reverence, laughter, clinking glasses, and soft background music. Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here. Paul McCartney, ever graceful, was speaking about the 1960s, that mythical time when music seemed to rebuild the soul of a broken world. Nearby, Jimmy Page, his silver hair tied back, was recounting old Zeppelin tales to Brian May, who listened with the glow of eternal curiosity. But in one shadowed corner of the room stood Roger Waters, the mind behind the wall, his sharp eyes scanning the hall like a hawk, and across from him sat Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy wore what he always wore, a simple black t-shirt, jeans, and a faint smile that spoke of storms survived. He was laughing quietly with Sharon, who touched his hand now and then, like someone grounding a wild soul. Waters watched him from afar, eyes narrowing, jaw stiffening. To most, this was just two legends under the same roof. To Roger, it was everything wrong with the modern world. That man turned music into a circus, Waters muttered, voice low but shaking with suppressed rage. We used to create art, The Wall, Dark Side of the Moon, manifestos for humanity, and now they bite bats and call it music. Beside him, music journalist Martin Clark tried to smile politely. He'd seen this look before in other artists, that toxic brew of brilliance and bitterness. Waters wasn't just angry, he was haunted. In Roger's mind, old ghosts were whispering. Syd Barrett, Fame, the endless lawsuits with Gilmore, Mason, Wright, his own concerts where half the seats were empty, his recent album, Is This the Life We Really Want?, had sold a fraction of what he'd hoped. Critics praised its intellect, but audiences stayed away. Meanwhile, Ozzy, that madman from Birmingham, was filling stadiums across the world. 50,000 voices chanting the name of a man who could barely walk without pain. How is that justice? Waters thought, staring into his drink. I create art. He creates noise. But deep inside, Roger wasn't angry at Ozzy. He was angry at time, at the fading relevance that clung to his aging heart like a shadow that refused to leave. The event host tapped the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate 50 years of British rock. To those who changed music forever, and to those who still keep it alive. Applause echoed through the room. Camera flashes sparkled like tiny bursts of lightning. And in that glow, Waters caught Ozzy's reflection in a mirror. Ozzy wasn't posing, wasn't performing. He was just there, simple, real, laughing like a man who'd found peace. That simplicity cut deeper than any insult could. He doesn't deserve that peace, Roger whispered to himself. He hasn't earned it. Waters had spent decades dissecting politics, writing grand statements about humanity. Yet he couldn't handle his own envy. And tonight envy was about to destroy him. The song changed, from Wish You Were Here to Paranoid. That riff, dark, primal, unrefined, filled the room like a growling beast. Several younger musicians cheered. Ozzy smiled humbly, raising his glass to them. Waters froze. The sound of that song, the anthem of working-class rage, struck him like an insult. Noise, he muttered again, louder this time. A world built on noise. Martin Clark's eyes darted around nervously. Roger, maybe just enjoy the night, yeah? But it was too late. The words had already started burning. Waters stood up, his chair scraping across the polished floor. Heads turned. David Gilmour looked up from his quiet corner. Paul McCartney stopped mid-sentence. The hall began to fall silent, the kind of silence that always comes before a storm. Scene 6. The confrontation begins. Waters walked across the floor like a general marching toward an invisible war. Ozzy noticed him approaching, confusion in his eyes, but no fear. Roger, Ozzy said softly, how have you been, mate? But Waters didn't answer. He stopped just a few feet away, voice trembling not from weakness, but from too much emotion. "Look what you've done to rock music," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You turned art into noise, meaning into mockery." Conversations died instantly. The sound engineer near the bar froze with a glass halfway to his mouth. "We used to create messages, Ozzy. Music that made people think. Now it's all just fireworks and headlines. A man biting a bat's head off, and they call him a legend?" Sharon squeezed Ozzy's arm gently. Ozzy took a breath. "Roger, everyone's got their way of connecting," he replied calmly. "You reach minds. I reach hearts. That's music, isn't it?" But the calmness only enraged Waters more, because humility always enrages ego. Waters' voice grew louder, his words sharper, each sentence another wound he tried to inflict on the man before him. "You made music cheap. You made it simple. You fed the crowd instead of feeding their souls. While we were writing The Wall, you were high on stage, pretending madness was art." The crowd stirred. Paul McCartney's brow furrowed. Even Jimmy Page whispered something to Brian May. "This is going too far." Ozzy stood still. His calm face was no longer calm. It was focused. The look in his eyes was the same one he had the night before his first Black Sabbath show. Tired, fearless, ancient. "Roger," Ozzy said quietly, "do you even know where I come from?" And with that, the atmosphere changed. The lights seemed dimmer. The tension thicker. Something profound was about to unfold. Not a fight, but a revelation. Waters crossed his arms, sneering. "Go on, enlighten us." Ozzy took a step forward. For the first time that night, his voice rose, not in anger, but in strength. "I grew up in Aston, Roger, in Birmingham. My father worked in a steel factory. My mom cleaned other people's houses so we could eat. We didn't have art school or Cambridge. We had survival." The room fell completely silent. Even Waters blinked, not expecting this. "When I left school at 15, I worked in a slaughterhouse. I killed animals all day because I had to, and when I came home, I still smelled of death. That's where Black Sabbath was born. I'm in that darkness. We didn't write to sound smart. We wrote to stay alive." The words hit like thunder. Real, heavy, unapologetic. Waters looked shaken for a moment, his arrogance faltering beneath the weight of authenticity. "But pride is a stubborn thing. That doesn't make what you do art," he said bitterly. "It makes it survival, different." Ozzy nodded. "Exactly. And that's what you'll never understand." And with that, a quiet ripple passed through the hall. Gilmore was nodding slowly. Brian May's eyes glistened. Because what Ozzy said wasn't just about music. It was about truth. The storm had begun. But this was only the first strike of lightning. What would follow, the confrontation, the redemption, and the lesson that would echo across the music world, was still to come. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Darkness, hit that like button, and share this story with your friends. Because in part 2, you'll witness the night humility defeated arrogance and changed music history forever. They say the greatest walls ever built weren't made of bricks, but of pride. Tonight, inside the sacred halls of Abbey Road Studios, one of those walls was about to crumble. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Voices of Darkness and like and share this video with your friends, because you're about to witness a night when truth broke ego into silence. For a moment after Ozzy spoke, Abbey Road fell utterly quiet. The walls that had once echoed with the Beatles, Floyd, and Zeppelin now trembled under a different kind of sound. Truth. Roger Waters stood still. His lips parted, but no words came out. He had built a life on speeches, statements, concept albums, but never had silence cornered him like this. David Gilmour looked at him from across the room, calm, knowing. Brian May leaned forward as if trying to memorize every word Ozzy had said, and Paul McCartney whispered something to Ringo, almost reverent. "He's not shouting. He's teaching." Waters' heart pounded. He could feel 100 eyes on him. He'd meant to expose Ozzy, but it was he who stood naked now. Waters forced a laugh. It sounded brittle, like broken glass. "So you think pain gives you depth? You think your misery makes you a philosopher?" Ozzy didn't move. He just looked at him, patient, as if waiting for the man to stop hiding behind his words. "Roger," Ozzy said softly, "you're confusing pain with perspective. I didn't choose my suffering, but I learned to sing through it." Sharon's eyes glistened. She'd seen Ozzy destroy rooms, tear hotel walls apart, but she'd never seen him destroy someone with calm. You talk about art and intellect, Ozzy continued. But art isn't just made in studios or schools. Sometimes it's made in factories, in hunger, in silence. That's where my music came from. Waters turned pale. Ozzy's words hit an old wound, one carved years ago in the chaos of Pink Floyd. He saw Syd Barrett's eyes in his mind, those lost, brilliant eyes that had once guided the band before madness took him away. He heard the studio fights, the shouting matches with Gilmore. He remembered nights when he'd thrown bottles, yelling about control, about vision, while the others just wanted peace. Now, standing before Ozzy, all those ghosts seemed to whisper the same thing. You became the very wall you once sang about. For the first time, Roger's anger began to tremble, not with heat, but with fear. Ozzy stepped closer, not threateningly, but like a father speaking to a wounded child. Roger, I know what loneliness feels like. You think I don't? I've been on stages with thousands of people chanting my name, and still felt alone. He paused. The drugs, the madness, the scandals, yeah, I did it all. But I never lost sight of the people who listen. The ones who come to me after a show crying because a song saved them. Ozzy's voice broke for a second. He looked at his hands, trembling slightly, like they remembered every stage, every note. You made songs to explain the world. I made songs to survive it. And that was the moment the Great Wall began to fall. Paul McCartney clapped once, slow, thoughtful. Brian May joined him, then Jimmy Page. Within seconds, the entire hall was applauding. Waters stood frozen, eyes glassy, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. This isn't your audience, he wanted to say. They're mine. They're supposed to understand me. But art doesn't belong to intellect. It belongs to the heart that feels it most. Martin Clark, the journalist, quietly whispered into his recorder. Ozzy Osbourne has just turned the concept of rock artistry inside out. Waters' mind drifted. He saw himself, 25 years old, holding a guitar, talking about rebellion and freedom. He remembered the early days with Syd, when music was discovery, not ego. Before the lawsuits, before the bitterness, before the loneliness that came from calling himself the genius of Pink Floyd. He heard Syd's voice in his head again, faint, ghost-like. You can't build walls and call them bridges, Raj. Waters blinked rapidly. A single tear formed, and it wasn't rage anymore. It was grief. Ozzy sat down, motioning for Roger to join him. And surprisingly, he did. You know, Roger, Ozzy began quietly, I was never supposed to be anything. I was a dropout. I had dyslexia. Couldn't even write properly. People said I'd die young. He smiled, faintly nostalgic. When we made Black Sabbath, we didn't even know we were inventing heavy metal. We just played what we felt. Fear, despair, anger, hope, all mixed up. He leaned back, voice softer now. You call it noise. But for the kid who's alone in his room at night, that noise keeps him alive. Roger's throat tightened. He couldn't argue with that. Waters tried to speak but couldn't. His voice cracked, the words dying in his throat. I wanted to make people think, he managed to say. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to make them feel. Ozzy nodded, compassion in his eyes. That's all right, brother. We all forget sometimes. That's why we need each other. There was no audience roar this time. No applause. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels sacred. Brian May finally stood. Gentlemen, he said softly, you both gave the world something it will never forget. But tonight, he looked around the hall. We learned that the greatest music doesn't come from brilliance. It comes from truth. Even Paul McCartney smiled and raised his glass. To truth, he said, and to the courage it takes to face it. Roger lowered his head. Ozzy gently patted his shoulder. And for the first time in decades, the man who built the wall let it crumble, not to applause, but to understanding. As the crowd began to disperse, Ozzy stayed seated, holding Sharon's hand. Roger stood at the doorway for a moment, looking back, eyes full of quiet regret. No one said a word. But everyone felt what had happened. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't a defeat. It was a resurrection. That night, music wasn't just heard, it was understood. Abbey Road had witnessed the rise of the Beatles, the birth of Pink Floyd, and the rebellion of Zeppelin. But never before had it seen such raw honesty. Roger Waters walked out carrying the weight of truth. Ozzy stayed behind, laughing softly with Sharon, at peace as he had always been, because humility in the end is louder than pride. If this story moved you, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to Voices of Darkness, and share it with your friends. Because stories like this remind us, even legends fall, but the ones who rise again do so with humility.